Okay. From Patrick. Hello, Andrew. There are no E's in Klavan. Klavan. I've listened with rapt attention to your recent talks on why the old classic movies, which relied more on witty and engaging dialogue, are much more entertaining than today's fares, which require nothing by way of clever dialogue. I would put forward that, ironically speaking, it was the production code, the Hays Code, they call it, instituted in the early 30s, which may be largely responsible for the quality of the dialogue in movies until the code died out in the late 50s. By making it hard to explicitly express sexual content, movie makers were forced to convey indirectly and non-verbally on-screen sizzle, and in doing so, their approaches were quite clever. Being forced to tone it down actually brought out more creative ways to convey more sensuous content, making it even more sensuous because it wasn't explicit. This is one of the great paradoxes of art. All artists long to be free. All art yearns to be free. And when you put restrictions on it, it does get better because people get cleverer. Once poetry lost the need for scanning and rhyme and rhythm, poetry disappeared. I mean, nobody reads poetry, and literally nobody. There are 10 people who read modern poetry. I read old poetry because I love it, but nobody reads the poetry in the New Yorker except the guy who wrote it because they've taken away the limits. And yet, I would not, there is something old-fashioned. There was, when somebody writes a sonnet, it doesn't quite work anymore. It doesn't quite describe the world as we live in it. So yes, the Hays Office, which was a foolish and stupid thing to do, made the movies better. There's simply no question about it. If you brought it back today, it would make the movies irrelevant. I mean, they're already irrelevant, but you couldn't depict life as we live it and as we know it to be with the Hays Office in place. So it's just entirely possible that nobody forced poetry into sonnet form. It just was the way it was. It's entirely possible that simply the mores of the time would have toned down the sexual content of movies and made them better. But it always is true that when you put limits on art, art becomes better because people just have to be more clever to do it. And yet, I don't believe you should put limits on art. I believe only the artist should put limits on art. It's one of the reasons I always worked in genre fiction, because genre fiction, you can't escape the needs of the fiction, and it always made a lot more sense to me.